Good evening. I'm Kim Knox, president of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. And on behalf of both leagues, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here. Unfortunately, my colleague Rosette Garcia, president of the North County League, is unable to be here due to another commitment. The event is presented by the two leagues in our county. The San Diego League is generally south of Highway 56 and also includes Poway and Rancho Bernardo. The North County League is north of Highway 56, including the 8 cities in that area. We work jointly on county and regional issues. A few upcoming events I'd like to share with you, starting with North County. On October 26th, they will be holding a new member meet and greet at the Carlsbad Dove Library at 6 p.m. Anyone interested in joining the North County League or anyone who has joined in the past 2 years is invited. On November 4th, they'll be holding an event called Food Fight for the Climate at the Oceanside Library at 10 a.m. You'll be able to learn about how you can reduce your carbon footprint through your food choices at this event with speakers from Green Oceanside, Brother Benno's, and others. Details and registration are available at their website. Also check the website calendar for a listing of committee and interest group meetings. The San Diego League will be doing an election season kickoff event next Monday, the 23rd at 6 p.m. on Zoom for those interested in volunteering for events related to the March primary election. Another webinar the two leagues will be doing jointly is Addressing Our Cross-Border Sewage Crisis on November 30th at 6:30 p.m. The links are in the chats for both of those websites. We greatly appreciate the donations that were made during registration for this event. For anyone who would like to donate to your local league today, you'll find those links in the chat as well. Now I'd like to introduce moderator Rita Sedman, member of the League's Water Committee and retired CEO of the Water Education Foundation, who will introduce our speakers.
Okay, hi. Yes, thank you very much, Kim, and thanks for everything you do and all the league members. I'm really excited to be involved today. Today is the official Imagine a Day Without Water. It's a national event that's supported by many people involved in the water world and people who want to highlight how water is essential, it's invaluable, and it's always in need of investment. Now, it may seem hard for us to imagine, even for a day, a life without water, but it happens in many places. Even in California's Central Valley, I've seen families whose wells have gone dry due to larger businesses and agriculture drying up the water right next to their land. And a few years ago, we only have to look at Australia, who had to nationalize their water and change their whole water rights law due to the extreme drought and people having to line up for drinking water. So it happens. The fact is that nearly 2/3 of the world's population faces water shortages. And even here in San Diego, we have schools like my nephew's school that have broken water fountains and little availability for students to get hydrated. And of course, we also need to remember how much food is embedded, how much water is embedded in the food we eat. The Water Education Foundation, along with the University of California, studied how much water it takes to produce some of these foods. For example, just quickly, a 4-ounce hamburger takes 616 gallons of water to produce, a piece of chicken, 330 gallons, and a couple of slices of tomatoes, 8 gallons. But many people also don't know where their water comes from, and that much of it is imported here in San Diego, hundreds of miles away. And with water rates going up 20% more in this area, water cost and availability is a big concern. And that's where the Colorado River comes into the picture. But as we'll talk about today, the Colorado River supplies San Diego with 72% of its water. And since the early 1990s, we'll talk about how the County Water Authority has invested in diversifying the supply, including getting a big slug of water from the Imperial Valley, which has just celebrated something that happened 20 years ago. Of course, this wide investment costs money and has problems. But as I remember old Governor Brown telling me, Rita, water with problems is better than no water at all. And so lastly, on this Imagine a Day Without Water, I'm thinking of a John Steinbeck quote from East of Eden, where John Steinbeck wrote about the rich years in the Salinas Valley, where the waterfall was plentiful and the people and nature were so happy. And then he said came the bad years of drought, when much of the crops died and the people left the valley in disgust. And Steinbeck said, and it never failed that during the dry years, the people forgot all about the rich years, and during the wet years, they lost all memory of the dry years. It was always that way. Well, before we begin, I'd like to quickly thank some of the Water for People folks that are joining from the local chapter here in San Diego. They help fund projects in developing countries. And then when I moved to San Diego a few years ago, I found Voice of San Diego, and I want to thank its members for joining us today. Welcome to Voice. It's an excellent source of information. Today we have 3 speakers, as you know, and we're going to let them each give about a 10-minute presentation. Again, we have Chris Harris, Executive Director of the Colorado River Board of California, Tish Berge, Deputy General Manager of the County Water Authority, and Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of the Voice of San Diego. Now, our first speaker we'll go right into is Chris Harris, and he's been with the Colorado River Board for 23 years, has served as Executive Director for the last 6. His board members represent a who's who of water stakeholders on the Colorado River in California, and those are ag, urban, environmental, tribal, and governmental. They're appointed by the governor, so they've got some juice. The board is involved in programs that protect and manage California's rights and interests on the Colorado River. They deal with a lot of issues, including border issues and climate change. So Chris and his board do fight for the rights for California and are involved in the negotiations for the 2026 water cuts among the 7 states. So glad to have you with us tonight, Chris.
Thanks, Rita. It's nice to see you again, too. Gosh, you and I go back probably 30 some odd years back when I worked for the state of Arizona. So it's great. And I really thank the league for this opportunity. I think it's an important issue, and the Colorado River plays a very significant role, particularly down I just want to highlight the Colorado River is incredibly important to California. It's a significant part of the overall state portfolio and is certainly a key feature in Southern California. There are 7 Colorado River Basin states, and California is one of them. And there are apportionment 5.5 million acres of irrigated agriculture. To Rita's point, it's a significant contributor to forage and fiber and food production nationally as well as internationally. There are significant hydroelectric power generation in the storage facilities and the dams and reservoirs on the Colorado River. And then we have some of the absolute most beautiful national parks and national recreation areas in the western United States within the basin. Next slide, please. There we go. I'm not going through each of these. I did highlight elements of what we affectionately call the law of the river. These are critical pieces of the law of the river that we operate the system under, and we apportion and allocate and use Colorado River water. Next slide, please. 7 states in the United States, and we're kind of at a similar inflection point now with the challenges that face us in the future. This timeline is pretty important because that first bullet really indicates the place where we had to make a very big shift in the lower basin. California, up to that point in time, was using in excess of 5 million acre feet a year lawfully. It was water that was unused in Arizona and Nevada, and California was able to access it and use it. But as Arizona's Central Arizona Project came online, they began to use their full mainstream apportionment. So California had to ratchet back. I didn't include a bullet, but I do want you to know in the year 2000, that's when the millennium drought started. So keep that in mind. We had significant water supplies in the 90s and 80s, but all of a sudden we entered into a very long dry period. There were surplus guidelines that were implemented in the last day of Secretary Babbitt's tenure at the Department of the Interior, and those were intended to help the Quantification Settlement Agreement, which is the nation's largest agriculture to urban sector conservation and transfer program. And much of those conserved water supplies from the Imperial Irrigation District do end up inuring to the benefit of the San Diego region. So it's been a monumentally successful program over time. But we noticed this drought now was coming on with a vengeance. We had the 5 driest years from 2000 through 2004, and that got everybody's attention. So we developed and implemented the 2007 interim shortage guidelines because we realized we went from full reservoir conditions in 2000, like 92% of capacity, down to 50% within 5 years. And then a series of sharing of risks in the Colorado River system, and they enacted a number of minutes to the 1944 Water Treaty, which were huge and beneficial for both countries. But this still wasn't enough. Having shortage guidelines, having these minutes with Mexico, and we had to come back and do more duct tape and baling wire to the interim shortage guidelines. And those became the 2019 drought contingency plans. They took 5 years to develop. Climate change driven, there's no doubt about it. All of the water experts and the scientists have been really looking at this, and we definitely now have demands that are larger than the available annual supply. So we had to take emergency actions in both 2021 and 22. And finally, in 2023, the 3 lower basin states really did something amazing. We developed an emergency plan for 2023 through 2026 that brings another 3 million acre feet of conserved water conservation storage and leaves it in Lake Mead to help prop up Lake Mead. And this is on top of our existing obligations and commitments under the interim shortage guidelines of 2007 and the drought contingency plans and the minutes with Mexico. Reclamation is in the process of updating and modifying the interim shortage guidelines to better give them more management flexibility, particularly with Glen Canyon Dam operations. And finally, the sort of this massive inflection point where we are right now is to figure out what we're going to do from 2027 on for, say, the next 20, 30 years, because the 2007 interim shortage guidelines expire at the end of 2026. Next slide, please. Excuse me. We call this the frog's leg diagram. And what it shows is the result of all the conservation programs that we've implemented over the years since the 07 guidelines started. So 2007 over on the lower left, and then along the x-axis, you can see it's up to the end of 2022. And the various shades, the rainbow colors in here reflect the various programs that we've implemented to conserve additional supplies that we retain in storage in Lake Mead. And what I want to draw your attention to is the dashed line at the base of the frog's leg diagram. And you can see where it crosses that first level 1 shortage condition about 2015 is now. We've put, something close to 100 feet of storage in Lake Mead through our programs and activities. And you can see the blue arrows pointing up from the bottom. Those are all the additional programs we've had to add to try and slow the rate of decline in Lake Mead over time. Next slide, please. But we actually got a lot of help from Mother Nature in water year 2023. So this last winter, as everyone knows, it was a great winter, not only within California and the Sierras. We refilled our significantly reduced reservoir storage across the state, but also in the Colorado River Basin. We had like 160% of normal snowpack. We had a cool spring, which allowed that runoff to come off slowly, not all at once. Refilled groundwater aquifers, and we refilled reservoirs. We didn't totally refill everything, but it was a very significant contribution. And in fact, reclamation was able to balance the contents of both Powell and Mead. So at the end of this calendar year, both reservoirs will have the same amount of water in them. So it resulted in almost 8.6 million acre feet being released out of Glen Canyon Dam down to Lake Mead. The lower basin in Mexico, and this is really a good news point, and San Diego County region, all of your water users, all of California's Colorado River water users, and then over in Arizona and Nevada, we did something we haven't done in a long time. We reduced our annual consumptive use to less than 7.3 million acre feet. And that's with Mexico. Normally, in a normal year, the three lower basin states could use up to 7.5 themselves. But this includes 1.44 million acre feet of Mexico's use. So that combined use between the lower basin states and Mexico is the lowest since 1984. But it gets better. California is projected to use, by the end of this calendar year, 3.7 million acre feet out of our 4.4. So that's 700,000 acre feet less than we normally could use if we had a full apportionment. Arizona's uses went from 2.8 down to 1.9, and Nevada went from 300,000 to just under 200,000. California's uses this year are projected to be the lowest since 1949. And because of the good hydrology and our tremendous work at conserving water, we conserved an additional million acre feet this year on top of our existing obligations. 7.48 million acre foot release from Glen Canyon Dam down to Lake Mead, which means that more work will be required of the lower basin states in Mexico. But I think we're up for the challenge. I think I may have, one more slide. If you'd move on to that, and we'll wrap this up. So I mentioned this pivot that we're making to develop the next set of operating guidelines that will probably be in place for the next 20, maybe 30 years. Include the tribes and their long-term water resources management needs, as well as environmentalists, Mexico, and so forth. So and support the preferred alternative that will come out of the NEPA process that reclamation is now undertaking. And I think a key point is rather than engage in litigation and fighting among the 7 basin states or even among water users, some of which would probably end up in the Supreme and looking at everyone's needs and trying to work out an equitable set of agreements and operating conditions that provide long-term water supply reliability and certainty to all of us, both in the United States and Mexico. Maybe I'll leave it there.
I want to just mention that there is a lot of jargon that we're using here, and for people who aren't water wonks, the million acre feet is just a big number, but just think of that football player standing in 1 foot of water on a football field and realize that's enough water for a couple families. And then we're talking about millions of acre feet. So it's big numbers. So let's move down to the local level from the Colorado River. That is our own San Diego County Water Authority. And we have Tish Berge with us. She's been around water for many years. Before becoming Deputy General Manager of the authority in 2021, she had plenty of experience on the local level, 17 years at several San Diego County water agencies. She served with Sweetwater and Recon del Diablo in financial management. She's won awards for her models and organization. And I'm sure that's coming in handy these days at the Water Authority. Again, the authority is the agency responsible for providing the wholesale water supply to the 24 member agencies. And that's going to 3.3 million people in our area. And of course, that represents a huge economic boom to our area, $270 billion regional economy. So Trish, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Rita. Appreciate the introduction. And as Rita mentioned, I've been in the water world for about 30 years now, started in wastewater, moved over to water. Had the pleasure of serving the retail capacity in North County, in Director of Finance for Rincon, and then all the way down in South County as General Manager for Sweetwater. I'm honored to serve the region now in a regional capacity at the Water Authority. I'm going to share my slides. I promise I will keep my jargon to a minimum, and we'll go from there. So I'm pleased to share, you heard a little bit about the wet weather that we've had from Chris. We are in a fantastic position for the new water year. The water year started on October 1st. And so we are looking at having more than ample supplies for our $270 billion economy and 3.3 million people. This is a reprieve from 14 what's called atmospheric rivers. And those came just in time. We were suffering drought prior to that. And so we were very pleased to have this opportunity to refill our reservoirs and look forward to the next water year. Now, that wasn't always the case. As I mentioned, we were coming out of a drought, and it was very different. During that time, the State Water Project, which is the pipeline system that brings water from Northern California down to Southern California, it was only able to deliver 5% of the demands on its system. And in Los Angeles, some residents were stopped from using water or were only able to use it for health and safety purposes. And then outdoor watering was limited. And in some cases, it got so extreme that they put what's called a flow restrictor on some residents' meters, and that restricts the flow. So just a trickle comes out of your faucet. No showers come with that. So that was very challenging time with the drought. I'm pleased to say that here in San Diego County, we didn't have any of those challenges, and we didn't have any of those cutbacks. And that's because of the investments made by our ratepayers over the last 2 decades. Now I'm going to talk more specifically about the investments that our ratepayers have made. You heard Rita talk a little bit about some big numbers when we were talking about acre feet. I'm going to talk about some big numbers that have to do with dollars. And that is $3 billion invested in infrastructure here in San Diego to provide water since 2000. We have done that so that we have a diversified portfolio and have multiple places that we can bring our water from so that we are protected during times of drought, like I mentioned. The $3 billion went into roughly 3 different areas, equal amounts. We've spent approximately $1 billion on emergency storage projects, $1 billion on building our desalination facility, and $1 billion making that quantification settlement agreement that Chris mentioned happen. I'm going to focus on the quantification settlement agreement and our desalination facility because those are what created new supplies for the region. So in 2003, we signed the agreement and entered into the agreement to bring water from the Colorado River directly to San Diego County. And this water was conserved water. And that's just a fancy way of saying we lined a bunch of canals. And instead of that water seeping down or evaporating, that conserved water now comes to San Diego, and it's high priority water. You heard about the law of the river. That's high priority water for us as well. This is also our lowest cost supply. We have a diversified portfolio. As you can imagine, with any diversified portfolio, there's variety and there's a difference in prices. This is our lowest supply, and as Rita mentioned, it's 72% of the water that fuels our region. Speaking of money, on the other side of it, our most expensive supply, but also our most reliable, is our desalination facility. And that was built and started in 2015. And it is a landmark deal that was a public-private partnership with Poseidon. It provides approximately 10% of the water for the region. And it was really critical in our ability to make sure that we didn't have cutbacks in the last 2 droughts. Being able to show that it was a source that was not, not at risk, like the State Water Project or the Colorado River, that was able to help keep us from having cutbacks. The next new water source that we're going to see are potable reuse projects. And we have 3 large ones in the county that are in process or have started. We we anticipate 100,000 acre feet in the next 15 years to come online. So Oceanside is providing approximately 3 million gallons per day through their Pure Water Oceanside. That is a groundwater recharge system. Pure Water San Diego, which anticipates being fully online by 2035, is going to provide 50% of the water for the city of San Diego. And then East County Pure Water Purification Facility, that one's going to provide approximately 30% of the drinking water needs for East County. So when I was invited to come talk, I was asked to share information about costs and understanding that the cost of water has been increasing. You heard Rita say 20% increases potentially on the horizon. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. I mentioned that we had $3 billion of investments in our infrastructure. Many of that was debt. Much of that, most of that, all of that was debt financed. And so we are still paying the debt on that. But that was in addition to an already existing infrastructure, 310 miles of pipeline, pipes that you could drive a truck through, 1,400 pipeline structures, 7 pump stations, 97 connections to our retail agencies to provide the water, and then 4 flow control facilities. So when we looked at our most recent rate increase, we looked at what the real major drivers were that were driving rates. And the biggest 3 were the pass-through cost of water, the reduction in sales of water, and then the increased cost of energy, which ultimately increases the cost to treat water. And I want to explain why the impact of decreased water sales is an issue. Now, in the water side of the business, we're a public agency. We don't make a profit. But we do want folks to understand that water is a precious resource, and we are stewards of that resource. And so we have a business model that you wouldn't put in place if you were a for-profit business. And the way our business model works is where almost the majority of our costs, more than 70%, are fixed. the pipelines, the infrastructure, the maintenance of that infrastructure. While the majority is fixed, the majority of our revenue and the way we collect revenue is variable and based on the volume purchased. So when we get plentiful water falling from the sky and our customers turn off their outdoor watering, we see a reduction in sales. And that affects the need to then increase the cost per unit, per acre foot or something like that, to be able to balance the books and make sure that we can continue to balance the infrastructure. So this, what I'm talking about is the wholesale. So we bring water into the region. We then sell that water to our 24 member agencies throughout the county. And they add their costs associated with overhead, their assets, their infrastructure, anything else that they need to do. And that can vary significantly. In fact, when the San Diego Regional Policy and Innovation Center is looking at water affordability, and they're finding that cost on the retail side can vary as a markup on the wholesale cost, can vary by almost 3 times, depending on the water agency that you're with. So when talking about all these dollars and costs and so forth, water has become a larger part of the household budget. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't receive federal funding like we did when the water infrastructure was first put in place. So when you hear about a desalination facility that's built for approximately $1 billion, and that's kept us from having cutbacks, that was financed 100% by our ratepayers. And so when you look at affordability, there really are 4 areas that are responsible for making sure that water is affordable. And that is the wholesaler, like the water authority, the retailer, the one who sends you your bill, and then federal and state to look at really affordability issues such as low-income assistance programs, similar to what you have on the energy side of the house. What we've done at the Water Authority to help in each of these areas is on the retail side, we've refunded $90 million back to our retail agencies, our member agencies recently due to successful litigation. And so we were able to give that money directly to them. On our side, we were able to refinance that significant debt and save $250 million. And then on the federal and state side, we've been advocating for infrastructure funding for our local dams and for creation and funding for a low-income water assistance program, affectionately called LIWAP. I'm very encouraged that there is laws being put forward to potentially make that permanent program here in San Diego County. And so that has been helping make it affordable for the end user and those who are on the fringe. When we were prepping for tonight, the League of Women Voters, your volunteers, asked me and offered to have a call to action. And so on this day, imagine a day without water. I want you to think about the water that comes out of your tap that is approximately 1 to 2 cents per gallon, how that's delivered to your home, it's safe to drink, and how you didn't have to cut that back during the last couple droughts. And then I want you to think about whether or not you think that's affordable. And I just want you to ponder that. And I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you for your interest in water, and it's a pleasure to serve you, our ratepayers. Back to you, Rita. If you're talking, you're on mute.
Unmute. I'm glad you mentioned that because about the tap water being only pennies, because people emphasize, oh, my bill went up, but then they go out and buy bottled water, which, by the way, is not regularly tested, not certainly tested by the EPA. The industry self-tests only when there's a problem. And lastly, it has a lot of microplastics. So our tap water is, you know, it's a wonderful thing that we have as citizens, and we need to safeguard it and take care of it. And I thank everybody in the water industry. And that's what Imagine a Day Without Water is about.
I'll drink
So-
to
Yeah, drink to that.
that.
We'll add something stronger later. But in the meantime, water is a political issue. And no matter, it's not a Democratic or Republican issue, fortunately, but it is a political issue. And nobody covers that better here in San Diego than the Voice of San Diego. And Scott Lewis is the editor-in-chief and CEO for the Voice of San Diego. That's something that you can all go and sign up for at voiceofsandiego.org. They have a wonderful free news feed that comes out every morning. Scott oversees all the operations, and he's created partnerships and products that have really earned this nonprofit national and international organization recognition, truly. Scott's a regular. You've seen him on news programs, and he helps his team produce the best journalism possible. Now, since his earliest days in San Diego, Scott has reported on water and its politics. And I'm thinking that he probably thought, like I did, that if he studied water for a year or so, he'd know all about it, and it might get kind of boring. But I think he probably realized that it's like an onion that you keep unpeeling and find other layers. So Scott's going to talk to us about covering water and politics and in San Diego County. And I just want to say, for full disclosure, I found out that Scott grew up in Utah. And you know, that's one of the states that competes with California for Colorado River water. So Scott?
Yeah, hopefully we're in a collaborative environment now, right? Can you hear me okay?
Totally collaborative, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rita, and thanks for everything you do for me and Voice and for the community, and thanks to the League of Women Voters. So, yeah, I arrived in San Diego exactly 20 years ago. My wife was in the military and brought us to San Diego, and it was I was just doing whatever I could to get jobs here. And the first job I got was the opportunity at the Daily Transcript to cover both water and housing. And I thought it was a terrible gig. I thought I'd really gotten the rotten end of the stick, but I dug in and didn't realize that I was given a truly wonderful gift to enter the water conversation exactly 20 years ago. I was able to get on the ground floor of understanding what was happening with two big deals, and you heard a little bit about them, but I just want to tell the story a little bit about them. So at that point, this company that they mentioned earlier, Poseidon, was trying to get the water authority to agree to purchase decades worth of water if they transferred and they filtered water from the sea and made it possible for them to drink in this giant desalination plant next to the old power plant in Carlsbad. And they were trying to get the water authority to do it. The water authority was like, I don't know. It was a big negotiation, and they were kind of mean to each other here and there. And I had to go back and forth. And I'll never forget, one of the leaders of the Poseidon group he was really good at criticizing journalists to the point where you're always thinking about what he would think about something you wrote, or how it would look or feel, or how it would come off. And I remember just feeling like I was really overwhelmed by the whole system. At the same time, the Water Authority was entering into this negotiation and working through this negotiation with the giant water agencies in Southern California, in particular the Metropolitan Water District and the Imperial Irrigation District, on a deal that would set the how much water California took from the Colorado River, and would make good on a goal that San Diego had for some time, which was to get some of the water that the Imperial Irrigation District is guaranteed every year, and transfer it over, essentially. It was a really interesting moment, but both of those initiatives were the result of a panic that sort of had occurred several years before I arrived in San Diego. In the mid 90s, there was a shortage of water, a drought, and the Metropolitan Water District, which is the wholesaler to the San Diego County Water Authority, had threatened to cut back supplies to the water authority pretty significantly, which would have made it so that we would have had some of the major problems that that was described about what happened with Los Angeles last year. And that panic, I think, is the cornerstone of so much water policy in San Diego now. That panic really woke San Diego up and made the water officials really want to create a more independent system, a more reliable system, a system that wasn't dependent on what these folks in LA were deciding. And so they put in motion that investment to try to transfer the water from the Farmers Imperial District and to embark on the discussion about the desalination plant. Now, we heard about the cost of the water. We do pay some of the highest rates in the United States for water, but it is a direct result of that panic and the investment that followed it. So one of the things that the Water Authority went through was this negotiation with these guys that wanted to filter the water out of the Pacific Ocean and make it available. 50 million gallons of water every day. They made the deal with the County Water Authority, and I'll never forget the Water Authority assuring me and many others that water that they were purchasing from the desalination plant would be a lot cheaper eventually, even though it was so expensive at the time, that eventually it would be cheaper than what it was costing to bring in water from the Colorado River and from these deals that we were making with the farmers and other things. And that eventually that we would be so excited that we had this source of water from the desalination plant compared to all the money that it would cost to pay for imported water. They made the deal, they agreed to purchase the water, the company built the plant, and now the Water Authority collects that water. And as you heard, over this last few droughts, we have had more water, I think arguably than maybe we needed. And I think that investment has really paid off. We've had a tremendous amount of water, but it has come at the cost of the high cost of water and the rates. And so we got to this point, and I've been following it, and I remember thinking several months ago that I wanted to follow up on that question. What happened to that promise that eventually the desalination water, the expensive water from the ocean, would eventually seem like a good deal? And I asked the Water Authority that, and something happened that I think is really special. The CEO, the new general manager of the Water Authority, Dan Denham, got on the phone with me and he said, "You know what, Scott? I think we got to be honest, and we got to admit that that didn't happen. That the cost of the water didn't go higher than the cost of the water that we import, and it wasn't necessarily the case as we thought it might be that this would work out. But you know what, Scott? It was still worth doing. It was still an investment that we're proud of, and it's provided this reliability that we can be proud of going forward." I got to say, I've been covering politics here for 20 years now, and that may have been one of maybe 2 or 3 times that a leader like that has admitted something uncomfortable like that, but been willing to twist it into something that they're proud of as well. That it's worth saying, like, that it was worth an investment, and now I think it's a really interesting place that we're at. We arguably have more water, or rights to more water, than we need right now. At the same time, we're using less water, even though our population and our economy have grown so much. And so we can look at that and say, did we make a mistake? Did we do too much investment? Are our ratepayers paying too much? We have to pay off these debts no matter what. We have to buy the water from this plant, regardless of our need for it. We have to pay off the debt for the dams and the lining of the canals that we did, and all the transfers and all the other infrastructure that we built. We have to pay all that off. Was it worth it? And I think that's such an interesting question, because the Water Authority and these other agencies are going through a really interesting discussion right now, which is what can we do with this massive capacity that we have built? Can we transform San Diego from this end of the line, barely, so beholden to what these other places decide about our water future? can we transform San Diego from that to an actual provider of water to other places because of the desalination agreements and because of the agreements we've made to take the water from the Imperial Valley, and because of our own recycling efforts that we're going on? Are we going to transform San Diego into an entity, a place that actually delivers or helps other places like Arizona or like Nevada meet their water goals? It's a fascinating transformation from when I started covering water and from that panic in the mid-90s. And so I think when we look at the high costs that we're paying, that's where they're hoping that there might be some relief in the future, or where they're also hoping that they can point to other agencies in other regions about what we were able to do here to secure our water future and what goes forward. But there's a lot of really interesting questions. That deal we made with the Imperial Irrigation District, it's going on for decades more, but it'll eventually end. Is that something that Imperial Irrigation District will want to continue doing? Is that something that our Southern California entities will want to continue doing? Are there other entities that would want to transfer water from traditionally agricultural areas to urban areas? Is it the kind of deal that other states could learn from and make as we look at the future of the Colorado River? The Colorado River really is going to continue on a more drying cycle. You'll hear them say something like, the hydrology didn't cooperate. When they say the hydrology didn't cooperate, what they mean is the rain didn't happen. And when the hydrology doesn't cooperate in the future, will these states make a deal and keep the peace and prevent what happened in Australia from happening here? In Australia, they had all these agreements and all these things going on, and then when drought significantly affected everything, they weren't able to make a deal. They weren't able to cut back and mutually decide how things were going to go, and the Australian government had to come in and decide how it was going to be divvied up from that moment forward. Imagine if all these deals we've made about the Colorado River were suddenly thrown out by the Supreme Court, and President Trump, Biden, or whoever it is gets to decide who gets water and what kind of politics could go into that decision. And that's a terrifying future I don't think anybody wants. So these negotiations going forward, these deals, these investments that have occurred, they are all so important, and they're such a high level, and there's so much at stake with each one of them. And I think that lastly, this high cost of water that we're paying has also fueled local politics. There were two agencies of the Water Authority that just decided that they wanted to leave the Water Authority because of these high costs. And the Metropolitan Water District in LA was offering them a lower cost of water for their largely farming community. They've managed to secede, and it looks like their voters will probably approve their ability to secede from the San Diego County Water Authority, which means that whatever part of these investments that they were going to help us make, they've been able to get away from with a small fee. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic, because it indicates, are we at the end of this massive investment cycle that followed this panic? That's one of the biggest questions going forward. 30 years ago, we had this panic for water. It spurred this massive investment in desalination, in lining these canals, in dams, and in transfers of water. Have we reached the point where that investment is just no longer something that San Diego County water leaders can count on ratepayers and these member agencies being willing to make? Or with those two out, and now a new law that says you can't leave the county water authority without a vote of the entire region, does that sort of give the water authority enough confidence to make some even bigger investments going forward? And there's some really special ones that could happen: more recycled water, and more different transfers of different kinds, and all kinds of different efforts. So it's a really interesting moment for water politics in the region and in the nation. And if you want to follow it, we've got it for you.
Voice has it. Thank you. I just want to mention that when people do talk about selling water in California, that California is the state that lagged behind all the Western states in selling, transferring water. And the reason is, when we go back to our history, it's called the Owens Valley. It was like Chinatown, but the real story of how those people lost their water rights and land. So we've been really fearful of selling water, but I think we can make arrangements, and I think that's part of the future. And it is interesting how San Diego now has a glut of water, but it's expensive. But again, if you look at it a certain way, it's not. And water with problems is better than no water at all. And I think now we'll open it up to some questions. Ann Olmsted is going to be looking at the questions. Do we have some in the hopper?
We do. Let me
Okay.
start with our first question. What are strategies for helping low-income residents with water bills? And this is addressed to either Tish or to Scott.
Scott, would you like me to take this one?
Yeah, please. Good luck.
Okay. Happy to. So during the pandemic, there were funds that were specifically identified to help customers, and those funds were for any customers. Since the pandemic, we've been able to lobby the state and the federal government to create at least a temporary program called the Low Income Household Water Assistance Program. It is modeled after LIHEAP, which is the Low Income Household Electricity Assistance Program that is federally funded, but state operated. So that program, the pilot of it, has been up and running. And unlike the money during the pandemic, this money is for low-income customers. And so there is a requirement associated, you have to have qualifying income in order to get that assistance. Another neat thing about this program, and I'm very excited about the prospect of it becoming permanent, is that it is run by community groups. So it's not run by the Retail Water Agency, it's run by, for example, the MAC project. Those community groups who are already out in the community, oftentimes helping low-income residents with other issues, the challenges that they're encountering. So right now, that's the program that is receiving federal funding. We, as the retail water agencies, need to follow Proposition 218, and we can only which says that I can only take water rate money from you to pay for service that I provide to you. I can't take money that you pay into your water bill to help provide service to your neighbor. So the only way around Proposition 218, and some of the retail agencies have done it, and I did it when I was at Sweetwater, is to use non-rate revenue funds, or a fancy way of saying money I can get not from charging your bill. So that can be interest revenue on money that we have aside. It can be cell site towers. It can be donations from employees, donations from other residents. So that is another way that programs can be put in place to help those who are on the margin and needing assistance.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Rita, you're muted.
Unmute. Sorry. I'll jump in here. There's a question about what percentage of water is going to agriculture. It's usually 70 or 80%. And what are the economic and conservation impacts for so many of the agricultural projects produced and going overseas? I know this happens in the Imperial Valley. Alfalfa for Saudi Arabia and almonds for Asia. I think this is maybe a question that Chris could jump in on a little bit, and Scott's aware of this issue also. So have at it.
Yeah, definitely in Arizona and California, there is forage crops which are raised, and some of those crops are shipped overseas, whether it's Japan or over into the Middle East region. These are these are questions I think that all of us are going to be dealing with going forward. Almonds, I don't know that we have an awful lot of almonds down there. Central Valley, though, there's significant almond production. And I think most of our almonds are exported out of the United States, or at least half of them are.
Yes.
Forage crops, another thing, in water scarce areas around the world, you still need to produce, milk products, dairy products, and so forth. So you need forage. I think nationally, we've got to get smarter about the crops that we grow in areas, but a lot of that's driven by, market economics, your location near ports and rail, facilities and so forth. But I think these are some of the things that we will be looking at. I don't know that there's a lot that we can do right out of the gate as we're negotiating the next set of operating guidelines. But I think as we become more nimble and adept at adaptive management with respect to climate change and its impacts on our regional and local water supplies, we're going to have to look at every tool that we have in the toolbox.
Chris.
think,
Sorry.
Ed?
I think it's worth keeping in mind. I think this is one of those sort of touchy, sensitive subjects, and the Saudis growing alfalfa in Arizona or something like that. It's worth keeping in mind. I think a couple of things like this. This iPhone took a tremendous amount of water to build in other parts of the world that was shipped here. It's not as simple as we're creating something here with our water and then sending it away. The whole world is creating stuff with their water and sending it around. So yep. I don't let yourself get too caught up in some of the divisive moments like this with the rhetoric about how water is used. Now, that said, there's a lot of people using water in ways along the Colorado River that they'll be held accountable for more and more as these sort of interrelationships and deals are made to preserve the Colorado River. And I think that's healthy. And it's better for us to go through that now rather than, like I said, let the federal government decide for us. And it'll be really interesting to watch them go through that.
And to Scott's point, and it's something he said during his opening remarks, I think is really important. I think it'll be helpful for all of you to understand. Already, we have 3 lower basin states that are working together on developing a regional wastewater recycling project in the Southern California region in Met's service area. And that would then allow, so if Nevada and Arizona both kick into that then allows California to lay off taking Colorado River water and let Nevada and Arizona take that water, because they've invested in something that helps us regionally and locally. And I think you're going to see more of those. I'm involved in binational negotiations with Mexico, and right now we're looking at reviving, yet again, the Rosarito desalination plant on the Baja coast. And that's going to have benefits. Some of those benefits are likely to kick back into San Diego again, too, through the Otay crossing. So I think as all of us, whether you're in Mexico or the lower basin or in the upper basin, we've got to look at ways we can augment the system and be smarter about the programs that we can collaborate with our partners in allowing us to cleverly transfer or reallocate available water supplies year by year. It's part of that becoming more nimble and adaptable.
I want to remind people to go into the Q&A and type in your questions. We really appreciate your questions. I think the dialogue is really the best. So Anne, I think you've got another question there.
Right. Chris, can you tell us more about how the negotiations for post-2026 are coming along?
I can't get into the weeds with you, but I can tell you that the 7 basin states, 30 tribes in the United States are absolutely 100% committed to doing everything and anything that we can do to continue in a collaborative and cooperative framework. In other words, we understand the risks if we let this get to a place where people have to back up into their corners and come out fighting or hiring very expensive law firms and ending up in a United States District Court or, heaven forbid, the United States Supreme Court. That's not the right path. That is not good public policy. Good public policy demands that we work very diligently and responsibly together, whether it's the agencies that I represent on the Colorado River Board of California here in Southern California, or my colleagues in my sister states across the river. And there is, and the lower basin, we've been working very well together for several months now. And I can tell you that we've got, we're well down the road. I think we've got some good ideas, and we've just begun to more substantively engage with our sister states in the upper basin. So we have a compressed time frame. We've got an awful lot to do. If any of you have been following reclamation sort of thinking on this, they would like to have a draft environmental impact statement out for public review and comment, potentially as early as the end of 2024. So there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. There's some huge decision points embedded in that very short time frame, but we're working very diligently towards that, Ann.
And Chris also might want to mention a little bit that in the lower Colorado River states, the three, the water master, the person with the power, is the Secretary of Interior, and that hammer is always held over negotiations. And I've often seen how in the last minute the negotiations, you have too, come together because of that hammer from the Secretary of the Interior. Are you seeing and feeling what we used to see with that?
Yes, we are. And in fact, Rita brings up an excellent point. The only way we ended up completing the quantification settlement agreement in 2003 was it took a carrot and a big baseball bat in order to get the California agencies to a place where they could finally get over the hump and make the agreements, execute the agreements, get their board approvals, etc. That this will be precisely the same thing that we will be utilizing now. And again, something both Tish and Scott mentioned is IRA funding. What the Biden administration have done with the Inflation Reduction Act and making $4 billion essentially available to the Colorado River Basin for grant programs, water conservation efforts, and so forth. And what reclamation is trying to do is incentivize water conservation activities that result in permanent water use reductions, not simply just paying for fallowing year in and year out. That's not a particularly good use of the taxpayers' dollars. So it's going to take a combination of Congress getting into this and working collaboratively with the states through our delegations, our state leadership, but you're going to always have this dueling, handful of one hand, you've got the carrot, and the other hand, you've got the stick. And sometimes you're going to need that cattle prod or a baseball bat thump you once on the head to get you back in a place where you can make good decisions in a reasonable time frame.
Ann?
Okay, what about the water for Tijuana? Do we have a moral obligation to share the Colorado River water with Mexico?
We do.
It's not even a moral obligation. Of course, we have that, but we actually have a treaty that was entered into between the two countries in 1944. And a portion of the 1.5 million acre feet that Mexico receives is used in the Mexicali Valley for both agriculture, mostly agriculture, some urban use there in Mexicali, but it also supplies potable water to Tecate, Tijuana, and Ensenada. They do have an aqueduct which moves some of that Colorado River water over the mountains to the Tijuana metropolitan area. But I believe right now, something like 25-30% of Tijuana is kind of on blue barrel water, where they have to, trucks go around and deliver water in blue barrels, not dissimilar to what's happening on the Navajo reservation and other Native American tribes within the Colorado River Basin, where they do not have a dependable potable water supply. So this is a big deal for Mexico. we have had a great relationship with them and have done over the past nearly 2 decades some very significant infrastructure improvement projects, water conservation programs in Mexico that have resulted in some water coming back to the United States for the investment, but also giving Mexico additional flexibility in how they use their conserved water supplies between their ag and urban sectors.
Thank you. Rita, I'd like to ask a follow-on question to Tish. I believe that we are now here in San Diego County providing some water to Mexico, are we not?
We are. We have an emergency agreement to be able to provide water to Mexico, and so we exercised that recently. It's an emergency agreement, but we've been exercising it, I want to say 2 of the last 5 years. So it's becoming much more common.
Yeah, it's actually a great deal. It's another minute under the treaty, and we actually wheel water through Met's system and then down through San Diego's system and deliver it, rather than run it all the way down to Morelos Dam and then put it in the Mexican agricultural delivery system, moves it across the Mexicali Valley and into the Tijuana Aqueduct. It allows them to take water out of Lake Havasu, which is quite a bit sweeter, nowhere near as saline as that when it's delivered down at the bottom end of the system.
There's a question about the Salton Sea, and we don't have time to go into a lot of it, but the Salton Sea was kind of the linchpin deal on getting this quantification thing from Imperial. And just to maybe either, well, any of the 3 of you talk about the commitment the state's finally doing, prodded for too long, to do some restoration at the sea. What's happening there, and why should we in San Diego even care about the Salton Sea?
I'll start, and then Scott and Tish can jump in too. The original quantification settlement agreement certainly involved, sort of a triangle of folks who were concerned about the Salton Sea. If you conserve water in the Imperial Valley, in the Imperial Irrigation District, and then transfer those conserved supplies elsewhere, you reduce the amount of agricultural runoff into the sea. The sea gets smaller. You have wind-blown particulate matter that's PM10, small stuff. It increases asthma rates, heart disease, and so forth. You have a drying up playa, similar to the Owens Valley that Rita mentioned. And ultimately, at the end of the day, just like in the Owens Valley, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power had to put in a massive dust mitigation program up there in order to continue to move water down to LA via the LA Aqueduct. Same thing here. All of the QSA partners stepped right up. They kicked in money. They created a Joint Powers Authority, and the state stepped in and said that they would also assume an obligation. And that's just on the quantification settlement agreement side. So that's 500,000 acre feet of water conservation. If you come in and anticipate IID is going to have to take additional reductions because there isn't enough water in the Colorado River, that goes on top of those, existing obligations under the QSA program. So there could be additional impacts to the Salton Sea. Now, the federal government in late 2022 has kicked in now and said, yes, we understand this. In order to operate the entire Colorado River system, there is a federal responsibility for some amount of Salton Sea impacts. And the state, as you said, Rita, has finally really accelerated, fast-tracked a lot of the restoration and air quality mitigation projects in the Salton Sea. And I think, we're starting to turn a corner there and get back on the time frame that folks originally anticipated. But Tish, Scott, you guys weigh in as well.
Smaller sea, though, right? Do you all agree?
Yes, it will be a smaller sea going forward. Yep.
Yeah, I would just add, and Tish, I'm sure, has a lot to say too. I think, the ancient path of the Colorado River flows into where the Salton Sea is now, and inland seas like that are part of the Earth going way back. And you know, the amount of reliability and water we have in San Diego, and the security that we've been able to purchase and build, has in part been at the cost of the Salton Sea. The more water we have in this urban area means the less water, as Chris described, for that flows through the farms and into the Salton Sea. And that is a crisis, both for public health there, and the wider ecology. But the state has started doing a lot of work to create wetlands and different areas of the sea that are less salty, and all kinds of movements to protect it and to imagine its future going forward. And I think that it's so important, it's so big, and it'd be such a disaster to let it completely collapse, that everybody seems to be saying the right things and doing the right investments. But it's worth being vigilant, both for the public health, like I said, the entire Imperial Valley, and for all kinds of species of birds and life. So we'll be watching it closely as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I would just, I'm sorry, Tish, go ahead.
That's okay. I just want to add, I wrote about the Salton Sea in an environmental studies course back when I was in college in the 80s. And so it was a problem then. And we knew it was a problem when we entered the quantification settlement agreement in 2003. And so that's why, as Chris pointed out, the San Diego County did pay for mitigation efforts on the sea. And to try to make sure that what we were doing to create water for our region didn't further impact an already impacted sea. So, we've been very good stewards, I think, of that resource. Unfortunately, it's been in a difficult position for a long time.
And I'd just point out too, this is not a unique situation either. I mean, the Great Salt Lake right now is going through a similar issue with declining inflow into the Great Salt Lake. The metropolitan Salt Lake City region is really starting to be affected by windblown particulate matter.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we lost you, Chris.
I said, and functionally the Salton Sink, that depression, it's below sea level, it's part of the Colorado River Basin. And Scott has it right. Sometimes the river goes in there. What was it, 1904? It did, and it went into it for 18 months before the railroad could close the breach. So yeah, it's something, as we manage this river basin, we have to deal with, whether it's Utah and the Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake, or us in California, and making our decisions. How we manage the Salton Sea going forward is going to be front and center part of the overall solution that we put together.
Final question, except for the last question, which is a different question. But this question has to do with the Tijuana River wastewater situation. Why are we not seeing that as another source of potable water? And what action should Governor Newsom be taking? Is he doing enough?
I think one of the misconceptions of the Tijuana River problem is that it's a single pipe that's just broken or something.
No.
And it's really the fact that Tijuana sits at a higher elevation than we do, and it has a vast population that isn't connected to any wastewater system. So any rains would flow and cause it at a rain problem. What we're seeing now, though, is the infrastructure that did exist and does exist treating it is also falling apart. And so we have this sort of dual crisis now of not just rainy time sewage problems, but also the problems of the pipes not working as they're supposed to. The real troubling part right now is that just to get the plant that we do have servicing the international border region right there has reached the point where we need about $600 million of investment just to get it up to speed. And that does not include anything that it would take to recycle. As we're seeing with Pure Water and the other projects, the amount of investment that would take is almost unimaginable for this particular problem. I agree. It's worth eventually being something we could make use. Every drop of wastewater is going to be valuable in the future, no question. But for this, we're so far behind on collecting sewage there that even thinking about turning it into something we can use is pretty wishful for now.
I'd like to ask Chris, because we've watched this for years when things get fixed up on the border issue, and then it breaks and it continues. I mean, this cycle has gone on for, many, many decades. And I know you have good relationships with the Mexican and the IBWC, et cetera, but it doesn't seem like, it really seems depressing that we can't solve this problem. It's not a state problem, it's a national and an international, and people get together and make promises, and some money comes from the feds, but then we never really solve the problem, and it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, and Scott's here kind of talking about the political issues that we all have to deal with, and along the Rio Grande border, and ultimately with the Colorado River and the Tijuana. Those three rivers are covered by the 1944 treaty between the two countries. And the Texas-Mexico Rio Grande border tends to kind of politically muscle the relations between the two countries. And I would state right now, with some of the things that are occurring along the Rio Grande, it's perhaps made it more challenging between the two countries and managing some of the political tensions that are going on related to immigration policy and so forth. But having said that, the two sections of the International Boundary Water Commission, which were created under the 1944 treaty, there's a Mexican section and an American section, and they do work well together. They're very competent, deeply committed people on both sides of the border that are trying to deal with wastewater issues in Nogales, Arizona, the Juarez, El Paso connection, and then ultimately over here for us, down at the border, San Ysidro and Tijuana. So it's, these things take time. There are, I think there are ways of accelerating things. You have to kind of move when the Mexican administration is ready to step in and say, yep, this is something we're ready to deal with now. May not be on our time frame. And then the flip side is we may be involved in things where we just can't, turn our attention to dealing with the water quality of the new river. And that's going to be something going forward. Again, I think Scott's right. The new river, it's a horribly polluted river, one of the worst in the United States. But I think in the long run, it is a source of supply. So is there a binational wastewater treatment plant that can be constructed that can help treat the new water before it enters the United States? I think all of us are trying to put our thinking caps on and be as sort of farsighted and forward-leaning as we can. But it's pretty challenging with the economic conditions as well as the politics.
Thank you. Anne, any more questions, or are we just about ready to wrap up? You're muted.
Thank God everyone does that. They all understand. The final question for all of you is, what can we do as league members? What can we do to help?
To make a difference.
Well, I'll start. Vote. I think, politics is part of it. American citizens, locally, regionally, on a state basis, and then across the Southwest, we all need to step up and ask our leaders at every level that climate change is important. How we put together durable agreements within our state and with our sister states, these things are going to be really important going forward.
Thank you for saying that, because it's so important. Everybody you vote for has a water position, whether you know it or not. So
Yep.
voting is important, and that's what the league is all about.
I would echo what Chris says, and look, understand that your local water district is the beginning of where water policy decisions are made, and there are politicians who believe in investing and think that the current investments are appropriate, and there are those who may not want to invest in the system, and you need to decide where you want your vote to go.
Mm-hmm. I would, just randomly think that investing in journalism that could follow this stuff is a very appropriate place to put some of that energy. But also, in truth, there is a ton of money going around. There's a lot of investment, a lot of politics, and taking the time to understand it, I think, is valuable. One of the best things you can do is take that understanding and tell other people about it, like what it takes to get water here, how much we have built up, why it is so expensive, and then they can make that choice about whether that's something they think should continue or not. But holding the leaders accountable as they go through that. And a lot of these water districts are elected offices, and the boards are elected, and it's worth getting involved if there's some of them go unchallenged for a long time. It's worth if you got a little time on your hand, go ahead and see what you can figure out, because it's really important. The other thing I'd consider doing, I don't know if you guys still do it, but do you guys still do the tours of the water, the Delta and the Colorado River?
The Water Education Foundation does those tours, and they're fantastic. And they go down to the Imperial Valley, they go all over the state and the West, and
I highly recommend that you consider that, because the Water Authority or the others can help you connect with where these are. If you do a tour of the Colorado River, you'll never be the same. As far as every time I drive past the canal, I make my kids stop and look at it and point out like how interesting it is and what's going on, and it'll change your perspective, and it's worth it, because it truly is a feat of engineering and just human enterprise, what we've done to get water here, and all the things that it takes. And it's just it's enthralling once you start getting into it, and I highly recommend those tours.
And the Water Authority also has some education programs, Tish, that the public can learn more, get deeper into it, the onion.
Yes, indeed. We have a Citizen Water Academy that we hold several times per year, so folks can learn more about water, and it's a great launch pad for getting into the larger state issues as well.
And don't forget to sign up for Voice of San Diego for that free news feed every day, and keep Scott working.
Thank you.
Last comments from anybody? Otherwise, I really want to thank everybody for joining. Kim, would you like to wrap this up?
Yes, thank you for moderating, Rita. And thank you to Scott and Tish and Chris. And also, we didn't even introduce you, Anne, but Anne is the chair of our water interest group. So thank you all for doing this tonight. We've learned so much. And also Jane Andrews coordinated this, and Jean Widener did the tech for us. So we appreciate everyone. Thank you all, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
You have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good
Bye.
night.